1875. Thunderbasin, Montana Territory. Louisa Hartley stood in Wesley Lancaster's gunsmith shop while the wind outside began its assault on Thunderbasin, and the telegram in her hand trembled not from the gusts rattling the window, but from the words printed on the yellow paper. She had 24 hours before Marshal Thornton Thorne arrived on the evening train, and the secret she carried would destroy her if Wesley refused to help.
I don't escort women who won't tell me why they're running.
Wesley's voice was flat as hammered steel as he set down the rifle barrel he'd been cleaning and fixed her with a look that said he'd seen through better liars than her.
I need to reach the Homestead Claim Office before the marshal gets here. That's all you need to know.
She met his eyes without flinching, but her fingers closed tight around the locket at her throat, the one thing she couldn't afford to lose.
Thornton Thorne doesn't chase women across 2 territories for unpaid taxes. What did you do in Silver Creek?
The question hung between them as the first heavy drops of rain struck the window like thrown gravel. She could tell him the truth and watch him turn her away, or she could lie and hope the storm gave her enough cover to disappear before the marshal's revenge caught up with her.
I testified against a man he called friend. The man went to prison. Thorne wants me to pay for that, and he'll use the badge to do it.
It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough to make Wesley's jaw tighten. He turned back to his workbench and began loading supplies into a leather saddlebag with the efficiency of a man who'd packed for trouble before.
We leave in 10 minutes. The claim office closes at sunset, and this storm's going to slow us down. Stay close and do what I say.
Relief flooded through her so fast it made her knees weak, but she kept her spine straight and nodded once. She didn't thank him because gratitude implied debt, and she'd learned the hard way that debts to men always came due in ways that broke you. The wind hit them like a fist the moment they rode out onto Main Street. Louisa's mare shied sideways, and Wesley's hand shot out to steady the reins before she could lose control. His touch was brief and businesslike, but she felt the strength in it and wondered if he'd been a soldier before he'd become a gunsmith. Men who moved like that had seen combat. They passed the general store where Mrs. Calloway was battling to secure a loose shutter, and Louisa kept her face turned away because the woman had already tried twice to extract her story over tea and shortbread. In a town this small, secrets were currency, and Thornton Thorne would spend liberally to buy hers.
He's already here.
Wesley's voice cut through the wind, and Louisa's heart dropped into her stomach. She followed his gaze to the hotel porch, where a tall man in a black coat stood watching them with the stillness of a snake deciding when to strike. Thornton Thorne's face was unremarkable except for his eyes, which held the flat emptiness of a man who'd strangled his conscience years ago. He smiled at her, a soft curve of lips that never reached those dead eyes, and tipped his hat with mocking courtesy.
He wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow.
Her voice came out thin, and she hated the fear in it.
Telegraph lines work both ways. He knew you'd run for the claim office.
Wesley didn't slow his horse, but his right hand moved to rest on the grip of his revolver, with the casual readiness of a man who knew how to use it.
Keep riding. We're not stopping for him.
Thorne's smile widened as they passed, and he called out something that the wind snatched away, but Louisa didn't need to hear the words to know they were poison. The land office door fought them as they tried to enter, and it took Wesley's shoulder against the wood to force it open against the wind. Inside, Clerk Hobson looked up from his desk with rheumy eyes that widened when he saw Louisa. The man was Thorne's creature, bought and paid for with whiskey and the promise of favor, and Louisa knew her window of opportunity had just slammed shut.
Miss Hartley needs to file her homestead claim. Now.
Wesley's voice carried the weight of a man who didn't repeat himself. Hobson's gaze slid from Louisa to Wesley and back again, calculating. Hobson cleared his throat with a wet sound and shuffled papers with hands that shook slightly. The marshal had already been here, Louisa realized, already planted the seeds of doubt about her character, her history, her right to claim land in Thunder Basin.
The filing fee is standard, $2. Miss Hartley has the deed from her family estate sale, properly notarized.
Wesley placed $2 silver on the desk, with a solid clink of metal on wood, then produced a folded document from inside his coat. Louisa stared at him, because she'd never shown him her deed, had never mentioned her family estate, had certainly never asked him to pay her filing fee.
How did you get that?
Her voice came out sharper than she intended, edged with the panic of losing control.
You left it on my workbench when you grabbed your shawl. I kept it safe.
His gray eyes met hers with something that might have been understanding, or might have been calculation. And she couldn't decide which unsettled her more. Hobson took the document and the coins with fingers that fumbled, clearly torn between his fear of Thorne and his fear of whatever he saw in Wesley Lancaster's face. The clerk stamped the deed with hands that left smudges of ink, then pushed the paper back across the desk without meeting Louisa's eyes. Hobson muttered that it was filed and recorded, his voice barely audible over the wind hammering the building. Louisa picked up the deed with hands steadier than she felt and tucked it inside her bodice, where no one could take it from her without a fight.
Thank you.
She directed the words at Wesley, not Hobson, and the gunsmith gave her a single nod before turning toward the door. They didn't make it 3 steps into the alley before Thorne's voice found them through the rain. Thorne called out that he had questions for Miss Hartley about her sudden departure from Silver Creek, his tone pleasant and poisonous. Wesley's hand closed around Louisa's wrist and pulled her back against the wall, his body blocking her from the street as Thorne's boots splashed through the mud toward them. The marshal appeared at the alley entrance, with rain dripping from his hat brim, and that soft smile still fixed on his face, like a mask he'd forgotten to remove. Thorne said he'd heard interesting stories about Louisa Hartley, about a trial, and a man who'd trusted her before she destroyed him with lies. Wesley's fingers tightened on her wrist in warning, but Louisa stepped forward anyway, because she was done running from men who weaponized truth.
I told the truth in that courtroom. If your friend went to prison, it's because he earned it.
Lightning split the sky behind Thorne, and in the flash Louisa saw his eyes go from empty to murderous. Thorne's voice dropped to something soft and terrible as he told her the truth had a way of shifting depending on who told it. And he intended to make sure Thunder Basin heard his version. He'd already spoken to the banker about her lack of references. He'd mentioned to the Reverend that she'd arrived alone without family or husband. He'd suggested to the ladies' auxiliary that a woman fleeing her past might bring trouble to their peaceful town. By tomorrow, no merchant would extend her credit, no church would welcome her, no neighbor would acknowledge her existence.
You've made your point. Now move on.
Wesley's voice was quiet, but something in it made Thorne take a step back despite himself. Thorne's smile returned as he said he was simply doing his civic duty, warning good people about bad elements. Then, his gaze dropped to Louisa's throat, where the locket had slipped free of her collar, and his expression changed to something hungry and triumphant. Thorne asked where she'd gotten that locket, his voice suddenly sharp with interest. Louisa's hand flew to her throat, fingers closing protectively around the silver. But it was too late. He'd seen it and recognized it, and now she understood why he'd followed her across 2 territories. It wasn't revenge for a friend's imprisonment. It was about what the locket represented and who would pay to keep its existence secret. Wesley's cabin sat at the edge of town, where the grassland began its roll toward distant mountains, and they reached it as the storm escalated from dangerous to catastrophic. The roof groaned under the wind's assault, and rain found every gap in the walls to send thin streams down the wood. Wesley lit the lamp and stoked the stove without speaking, giving her space to stop shaking. Louisa sank into the chair by the stove and pulled the locket free, opening it with numb fingers. Inside was a photograph that shouldn't exist, taken 5 years ago in a Silver Creek photography studio. 2 people stood side by side in formal dress, the woman young and pregnant, the man older and powerful.
That's Senator Whitmore.
Wesley's voice came from behind her, and she didn't turn because she couldn't bear to see his expression change when he understood.
That's his daughter. She died in childbirth 6 months after this was taken. The baby died too.
Her voice was mechanical, reciting facts like a court clerk.
Except, the baby didn't die. I was. The midwife. The senator paid me to say both mother and child were lost, and he took the infant to raise in secret because the father was an Apache scout, and the scandal would have destroyed his political career.
Silence filled the cabin except for the storm's rage. Louisa waited for Wesley to order her out, to tell her she'd brought corruption and lies into his home, and he wanted no part of it. Instead, he moved to crouch beside her chair, his gray eyes fixed on the locket with an intensity that made her chest tight.
Why did you keep the photograph?
It was the one question she hadn't expected, and it cracked something open inside her that she'd kept sealed since Silver Creek.
Because that baby deserved to be remembered as more than a secret. Because his mother loved him enough to have that photograph made before the senator found out and took him away. Because someday, he might want to know where he came from.
Her voice broke on the last words, and she snapped the locket shut before tears could fall.
The man who went to prison. He was the Apache scout.
Wesley's voice was gentle now, the sternness stripped away to reveal something she hadn't expected to find beneath.
He came back 5 years later, looking for his son. I told him the truth. The senator had him arrested for trespassing and assault, and Thorne testified that he'd attacked me when I refused to lie for him. The jury believed a white marshal over an Apache scout.
She met Wesley's eyes finally, and saw neither judgment nor pity, just a steady acceptance that made her breath catch.
Thorne wants the locket because it proves the senator's daughter had a mixed-race child. That kind of evidence could destroy Whitmore's career and everyone connected to him.
Wesley stood and moved to the window, peering through the shutters at the storm-lashed darkness.
He'll come for it tonight. He can't risk you showing it to anyone else. Wesley barred the door with a plank that looked like it had been made for exactly this purpose, then handed Louisa a rifle from the rack by his workbench. You know how to use this?
My father taught me to shoot before he taught me to read.
She checked the rifle's action with practiced efficiency and positioned herself by the window where she had a clear view of the approach. Wesley took his position by the door with his revolver drawn and his back against the wall. They waited in the lamplight while the storm tried to tear Thunder Basin apart, board by board. The first sound wasn't Thorne. It was the crack of wood giving way as something heavy slammed into the cabin's side wall. Wesley's head snapped toward the sound, and Louisa's rifle swung to cover the corner where the noise originated. The wall bulged inward, then held as whoever was outside reconsidered their approach.
He brought help.
Wesley's voice was grim.
Probably promised them a cut of whatever reward Whitmore's offering for that locket.
They can't have it. That baby deserves better than to be erased because his existence is inconvenient.
Luisa's voice was steady now. The fear burned away by something hotter and more useful. She'd spent 5 years running from the choice she'd made in that Silver Creek birthing room, and she was done apologizing for choosing a child's truth over a powerful man's comfort. The door exploded inward despite the bar, wood splintering as 2 men threw their combined weight against it. Wesley fired twice before they could recover, the revolver's report deafening in the small space. One man went down clutching his leg, and the others scrambled back into the storm. Thorne's voice called from the darkness, offering terms. He'd forget he saw Louisa if she handed over the locket. He'd even withdraw his complaints to the town council. She could keep her land claim and live peacefully in Thunder Basin. All she had to do was give him the one piece of evidence that could free an innocent man from prison.
No.
Louisa's voice rang clear through the storm, and she saw Wesley's mouth curve in something that might have been approval, or might have been pride. Thorne's response was a bullet through the window that shattered the glass and buried itself in the opposite wall. Louisa dropped below the sill and returned fire, her shot wild, but close enough to make the shadows outside scatter. Wesley moved to join her, covering the shattered window while she reloaded, his shoulder pressed against hers, solid and steady. And Louisa felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the realization that she wasn't alone anymore.
There's a root cellar under the floor near the stove. Trapdoors hidden under the rug.
Wesley's voice was calm, despite the chaos outside.
You take the locket and get down there. I'll hold them off until the storm breaks and help can arrive.
I'm not hiding while you die for my choices.
She loaded another round into the rifle with hands that didn't shake.
We hold together, or we fall together.
Wesley looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them that felt like a promise being made without words. Then he nodded once and turned back to the window. A bullet grazed Wesley's arm, tearing through his coat sleeve and leaving a red line across his bicep. Louisa tore a strip from her shawl and bound it tight while he kept his revolver trained on the window. Her fingers worked quickly, and Wesley didn't flinch even when she pulled the bandage tight enough to hurt.
You've done this before.
Midwife, remember? I've stitched more wounds than you've fired bullets.
She tied off the bandage and picked up her rifle again, and Wesley caught her wrist before she could move away.
When this is over, when Thorne's dealt with and the truth comes out. Stay.
The words were rough, stripped of the careful distance he'd maintained since she'd walked into his shop. Louisa's heart kicked hard against her ribs because she understood what he was offering. Not just protection, not just help with a legal claim, but a place beside him. Partnership. Home.
You don't know me. You don't know what I've done or who I've hurt.
I know you carried evidence of an innocent man suffering for 5 years because you believed he deserved justice. I know you'd rather die than let a corrupt marshal erase a child's existence. That's enough.
Lightning split the sky outside, and in the brilliant flash, Louisa saw Thorne moving toward the cabin door, with 2 more men behind him. She raised her rifle and fired, the shot going wide, but close enough to make them scatter.
Ask me again, when we're not about to die.
She didn't look at Wesley when she said it, but she felt his smile like warmth against her skin. Thorne made it through the door on the 3rd attempt, his pistol raised, and his face twisted with the rage of a man who'd built his life on other people's silence and couldn't tolerate defiance. Wesley moved to intercept him, and for a moment, the 2 men faced each other in the lamplight, with guns drawn and murder in the air between them. Thorne said he'd kill them both, and tell the town they'd died in the storm. That everyone knew storms were dangerous, and people got careless. He'd plant the locket on Luisa's body and deliver it to Senator Whitmore personally, along with assurances that the problem had been permanently solved. Then, he'd collect his reward and move on to the next town, where his badge gave him power over people too frightened to resist.
You forgot one thing.
Wesley's voice was cold as river ice.
The telegraph works both ways. I sent a wire to the territorial marshal 2 hours ago. Told him about a corrupt lawman threatening citizens and demanding bribes. Told him about Senator Whitmore's missing grandchild and the evidence that proves the senator committed fraud. They'll be here on tomorrow's train.
Thorne's gun hand wavered, his dead eyes suddenly calculating odds that had shifted against him. Thorne insisted it was Wesley's word against his, and no one would believe a small-town gunsmith over a decorated marshal. But his voice lacked conviction now, and his gun had lowered slightly.
They'll believe this.
Louisa stepped forward and opened the locket, holding it up so the lamplight caught the photograph inside.
Senator Whitmore's daughter. His Apache grandson. The date stamped on the back by the Silver Creek Photography Studio. Everything you tried to hide for 5 years.
Thorne's face went gray as old snow. He raised his pistol one final time, but Wesley was faster. The revolver's report filled the cabin, and Thorne dropped his gun with a cry of pain as the bullet shattered his wrist. The marshal stumbled back through the doorway and fell into the mud, where his hired men were already fleeing into the storm. Dawn came slowly, the storm releasing thunder basin with reluctant fingers. Louisa and Wesley stood in the wreckage of his cabin, while the first light turned the sky from black to pearl. Thorne was tied securely in what remained of the shed, nursing his shattered wrist in the knowledge that his career had ended the moment Wesley sent that telegram. The territorial marshal would arrive on the afternoon train with federal deputies and a list of questions that Thorne wouldn't be able to lie his way through.
The cabin can be repaired.
Wesley's voice was matter-of-fact as he surveyed the damage, but his arm around Louisa's shoulders was gentle.
Roof needs replacing. Walls need patching. Door needs rebuilding.
I can help. I know carpentry. My father built our first homestead from nothing.
She leaned into him, her exhaustion making her brave enough to take the comfort he offered.
I'll accept your help on one condition.
He turned her to face him, his gray eyes warm in the dawn light.
When the cabin's repaired, you move in. Not as a boarder, not as temporary arrangement, as my wife.
Louisa's breath caught, because she'd expected the question eventually. But not this soon. Not before they'd had time to learn each other beyond crisis and danger.
You're asking me to marry you after one night of siege and gunfire?
I'm asking you to marry me because you stayed and fought instead of running. Because you value truth over safety. Because you see the world the way I do, as a place that needs defending even when it's hard.
He cupped her face in his hands, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheeks.
Because when I thought Thorne might hurt you, I understood what it means to be afraid. And I haven't been afraid of anything in 15 years.
I need to tell you why I left the last town. Why Thorne came after me.
Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled.
I already know.
Wesley pulled the locket from his pocket and opened it to show the photograph inside.
Thorne talked before you woke. Tried to bargain with information. Said you witnessed his brother kill a man in cold blood in Billings. Said you testified at the trial and got his brother hanged. Said Thorne swore revenge and tracked you across 3 territories.
His brother shot an unarmed shopkeeper over a poker debt. I was walking past when it happened. I testified because it was the truth. The judge said I was brave. The town said I was a troublemaker who should have kept quiet. Thorne wore a deputy badge back then. He couldn't touch me legally, so he made my life hell until I had to leave.
She met Wesley's eyes, without flinching.
I won't apologize for telling the truth. Not even if it makes my life harder.
Good. Because I wouldn't want a wife who compromises on what's right.
He kissed her then, slow and thorough, and Louisa felt something settle in her chest that had been restless since Billings. Safety. Belonging. Home. When they pulled apart, the sun had cleared the mountains, and Thunder Basin gleamed wet and clean below them. By mid-morning, they'd walked into town together, and Thunder Basin noticed. Louisa wore her green dress still damp from the storm, her hair braided, simply because she had no time for vanity. Wesley kept his hand on the small of her back, a claim that everyone recognized. Whispers followed them down the main street, but no one spoke directly, not with Wesley Lancaster's gray eyes daring them to comment. The telegraph office was busy with storm damage reports, but the operator made room when Wesley approached.
Need to send 2 messages. First one to Territorial Marshal Kane and Helena. Tell him we have Thornton Thorne in custody on charges of attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and abuse of authority. Tell him I have signed witness statements and physical evidence. Second message to Federal Marshal Hayes in Bismarck. Tell him Thorne has been collecting protection money from businesses across 3 territories under color of law.
The operator's eyes widened, but he wrote quickly, his pencil scratching across the message forms. Within the hour, responses came back. Marshal Kane would arrive on the evening train with deputies. Marshal Hayes wanted a full report and promised a federal investigation into Thorne's activities dating back 5 years.
It's really over.
Louisa's voice was quiet as they left the telegraph office, disbelief making her steps unsteady.
The legal part is over. The rest is just beginning.
Wesley guided her toward the general store where Mrs. Chen was sweeping storm debris from her porch. The elderly woman looked up, and her weathered face creased in a smile. Mrs. Chen told them her store had weathered the storm with only minor leaks, and she'd already started inventory for repairs. Then her sharp eyes moved from Wesley to Louisa and back. Mrs. Chen said she'd heard about the excitement at the gunsmith's cabin, heard that Thorne had been arrested, heard that Miss Hartley had proved herself quite capable with a rifle. Her tone suggested approval.
We'll need supplies for cabin repairs. Also need to order a few things from the catalog.
Wesley's voice was casual, but his hand tightened on Louisa's.
Wedding dress. Wedding suit. Silver rings if you have them in stock.
Mrs. Chen's smile widened into something genuinely delighted. She said she had the catalog and the rings and would be honored to help with the arrangements. She also said, with meaningful emphasis, that Miss Hartley had more friends in Thunder Basin than she knew, and certain people who'd spread poison about her would find their words falling on deaf ears from now on. The catalog pages rustled under Louisa's fingers as she looked at wedding dresses that seemed impossibly elegant for a woman who'd spent the last 6 months running. Wesley stood close enough that she could feel his warmth, his presence steady and reassuring.
The simple one. The cream-colored one with the lace collar. That's practical.
The white one, with the pearl buttons. That's beautiful. Get the beautiful one.
His voice was firm, and Louisa looked up to find him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch.
You've spent enough time being practical and cautious. Time to have something beautiful.
Mrs. Chen made approving noises and wrote down the order, promising it would arrive within 2 weeks on the supply train. The rings were simple silver bands that fit perfectly, and Wesley paid without hesitation. As they left the store, Louisa felt the weight of the ring box in her pocket, like a promise made tangible. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Wesley's friends from the gunworks came to help clear debris and assess the cabin damage. Louisa worked alongside them, her carpentry skills proving useful as they salvaged what could be saved and made lists of what needed replacing. The storm damage extended through much of Thunderbasin, but Wesley's cabin had taken the worst of it due to its exposed position. By evening, they had a temporary roof patched over the main room, and the walls secured enough to keep out wind and rain. Working beside Wesley felt natural in a way Louisa hadn't expected. They developed a rhythm quickly, anticipating each other's movements, passing tools without needing to ask. He was patient when she struggled with a difficult cut, showing her the angle without making her feel incompetent. She was efficient with measurements and kept the work organized, which he appreciated after years of solitary projects that sprawled chaotically.
You're good at this.
My father believed daughters should know building as well as sons. He said self-reliance wasn't gendered.
Your father was wise.
He was. Until he trusted the wrong partner and lost everything. That's how I learned that wisdom doesn't always protect you from betrayal.
Wesley's hammer paused mid-swing, and he looked at her with understanding that needed no words.
The enemy you made in the last town. The reason you won't talk about. Was it similar?
Louisa's hand stilled on the board she was holding. The question hung between them, and she realized she was tired of carrying the secret alone.
His name was Marcus Wendell. He owned the land office. He proposed marriage and I refused because I didn't love him and because I'd seen how he treated his clerk, with casual cruelty disguised as jest. He didn't accept the refusal well.
She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue.
He spread rumors that I'd accepted gifts from him, that I'd led him on, that I was a woman of loose morals who couldn't be trusted. When that didn't work, he tried to have me arrested for theft, claiming I'd stolen money from his office during a meeting. I hadn't. But he had friends in law enforcement, and I had no proof of my innocence beyond my word.
So you ran.
I ran. Because staying meant jail or worse, and because I knew he wouldn't stop until he'd destroyed my reputation completely. He was that kind of man. The kind who couldn't bear losing.
Wesley set down his hammer and moved to stand directly in front of her. His gray eyes fierce.
If he follows you here, he'll find me waiting. And he'll discover that some losses are permanent.
The protective intensity in his voice sent warmth through Louisa's chest. She reached up to touch his face, her thumb brushing his jaw.
He won't follow. He's too proud to chase a woman who rejected him across territories. But Thorne knew the story somehow. He must have telegraphed inquiries, pulled records. That's what he meant about my past catching up.
Thorne's telegraph access is over. His badge is forfeit. His power here is broken. Whatever he told people, whatever poison he spread, it ends now.
His certainty steadied her, and Louisa nodded, letting herself believe it might be true. The territorial marshal arrived the next afternoon with 2 federal deputies and expressions that meant business. They took Thorne into custody with efficient professionalism, listening to Wesley's account and examining the evidence with thorough attention. The embezzlement records were damning, the pattern of evictions suspicious, and the attempted murder charge sealed Thorne's fate. Marshall Kane was a weathered man in his 50s, with shrewd eyes and a reputation for fairness. He spoke with Louisa privately, asking careful questions about her history and the rumors Thorne had referenced. She told him everything about Marcus Wendell and the false theft charge, her voice steady, despite the fear that he might not believe her. Marshall Kane listened without interruption, then pulled a telegram from his coat pocket. He said he'd taken the liberty of contacting authorities in her previous town after hearing Thorne's accusations. The theft charge against her had been quietly dropped 3 months ago, when Marcus Wendell's clerk came forward with evidence that Wendell had fabricated the entire incident. The clerk had been fired and threatened into silence initially, but guilt and conscience had eventually driven him to speak truth. Wendell himself was now under investigation for financial impropriety and abuse of office. Louisa stood on the steps of the marshal's office with tears streaming down her face. But this time, they were tears of relief and gratitude. Wesley was there instantly, his arms around her, his voice low and steady as he told her it was over. She was free. The shadow that had chased her across territories was finally gone. Marshall Kane stood in the doorway watching with approval, then tipped his hat and said Thunder Basin was lucky to have citizens like them, people who valued truth and stood their ground when it mattered. The news spread through town faster than wildfire. By evening, the general sentiment had shifted completely. The people who'd avoided Louisa or whispered about her past now came forward with apologies and offers of friendship. Mrs. Chen spread the true story with enthusiastic efficiency, making certain everyone understood that Miss Hartley had been wrongly accused, and that Thorne had been the real villain all along. The Chinese families who'd been threatened with eviction brought food to Wesley's cabin in gratitude, traditional dishes that filled the repaired kitchen with unfamiliar but wonderful aromas. The Blackfoot trader who'd faced harassment from Thorne's men came with quality furs as a wedding gift, his weathered face creased in a rare smile. Thunder Basin had been tested by the storm and by Thorne's poison, and it had emerged stronger, more unified, more certain of its values. The 2 weeks until the wedding dress arrived passed in a blur of repair work and preparation. The cabin took shape again under Wesley's skilled hands and Louisa's determined help. The new roof was stronger than the old one, the walls reinforced, the windows replaced with glass that let in clear light. Louisa planted herbs in boxes outside the kitchen window, practical things like sage and thyme that would be useful for cooking. Wesley built her a workbench in the corner of his workshop, a space that was hers for whatever projects she wanted to pursue. They worked side by side in comfortable companionship, learning each other's rhythms and habits, building something solid and lasting. The wedding took place on a clear Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks after the storm. The sky washed clean and brilliant blue overhead. Louisa wore the cream-colored dress with the lace collar, simple and elegant and beautiful in the way Wesley had promised. He wore a dark suit that made his gray eyes seem lighter, his hair neatly trimmed, but still showing the slight wave that she'd come to love. The church was packed with people who'd come to witness and celebrate, their presence a declaration that Thunder Basin stood with the couple who defended truth against corruption. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony with warmth and sincerity, his words about partnership and courage resonating through the small building. When Wesley slipped the silver ring onto Louisa's finger, his hand was steady and sure. When she placed his ring in return, her voice was clear and strong as she spoke the vows that bound them together. The kiss was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and the congregation erupted in applause that echoed off the wooden walls. Afterward, they stood in the church doorway signing the property deed that made the cabin and land officially theirs, shared equally, a partnership in law as well as love.
Louisa Lancaster.
Wesley spoke her new name with quiet satisfaction, testing the sound of it.
Has a good sound to it. Strong. Fits you perfectly.
Louisa Lancaster.
She repeated it, feeling the shape of the words, the weight of the commitment they represented.
Yes. It fits.
The celebration that followed was spontaneous and joyful. The community coming together with food and music and genuine happiness. Mrs. Chen brought dumplings and spring rolls. The Blackfoot families brought venison and bread. The miners brought whiskey and songs. And the atmosphere was one of hope and new beginnings. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Wesley and Louisa slipped away from the crowd and walked back toward their cabin hand in hand. The path was familiar now, the landscape beautiful in the fading light, the town behind them settling into peaceful evening. Thunder Basin spread out below, the telegraph wires catching the last light, the buildings solid and enduring against the Montana wilderness.
No regrets?
Wesley's voice was quiet as they walked, his thumb stroking her knuckles gently.
None. This is exactly where I'm meant to be. With you. Building something real.
Louisa spoke with absolute certainty, the fear and doubt that had driven her for months finally gone, replaced by peace and purpose. The cabin stood warm and welcoming as they approached, lamplight glowing in the windows, smoke curling from the chimney. It looked like home in a way that no place had looked to Louisa since she'd fled Marcus Wendell's accusations. Wesley opened the door and gestured for her to enter first, a small courtesy that made her smile. Inside, everything was neat and orderly, the repairs complete, the furniture arranged with care. Her herbs sat in their boxes on the windowsill. Wesley's tools hung organized on the workshop wall, and the space felt like theirs, truly shared and equal.
I know it's not fancy. Not like what you might have had if circumstances had been different.
Wesley's voice held uncertainty as he watched her take in their home.
It's perfect. It's honest and solid and built by our own hands. That's worth more than any fancy house that came without effort or meaning.
She turned to face him, stepping close, her hands resting on his chest, where she could feel his heartbeat steady and strong.
You gave me truth when I'd been living with lies. You gave me safety when I'd been running scared. You gave me partnership when I'd been alone. This cabin, this life, this marriage, it's everything I didn't know I needed.
I was planning to stay solitary. Figured I was better off alone. That caring for someone meant weakness and risk.
His arms came around her waist, pulling her closer.
Then you walked into my shop with secrets in your eyes, and determination in every line of your body. And I knew I was wrong. Caring for you doesn't make me weak. It makes me stronger. Because now I have something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth building toward.
The kiss was deeper this time, full of promise and passion and commitment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing quickly, Wesley rested his forehead against hers.
Welcome home, Louisa Lancaster.
Welcome home, Wesley Lancaster.
Her voice was soft and full of love, the words carrying weight and meaning that went beyond simple greeting. They stood together in the lamplight. Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd fought corruption and fear, and won, who'd built something real and lasting from honesty and courage. Outside, Thunder Basin settled into night, the telegraph wires humming with messages that traveled across territories, carrying news and truth faster than lies could spread. The storm that had trapped them and forced confrontation had passed, leaving clear skies and new beginnings. The cabin was warm, the future was bright, and Louisa and Wesley Lancaster had each other. Partners in every sense of the word, building a life together in the wild Montana territory where truth mattered more than reputation and love was stronger than fear. The locket with its impossible photograph sat on the mantel, a reminder of the promise that had bound them and the journey that had brought them home.